All right, so hello everyone again. I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar, Starting Off Right, Professional Workplace Success. I'm Calvin Landrum, a training coordinator with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session. Also joining us are Bethany and Joanne from our partners at Education Northwest, who've helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You'll also see them in the chat and Q&A to help address questions you may have during the session. So here's more about what we hope you'll be able to get out of this session. We hope that you would be able to first identify approaches to understanding organizational culture so you can quickly get up to speed on how things work in your organization. Next, be able to apply best practices for in-person, phone, and email communications. We also want you to employ strategies that enhance a smooth transition at your sponsoring organization. And finally, we hope you'll be able to implement effective techniques for developing strong, proactive relationships with your supervisors and peers. So here's our agenda for the session. We'll start by looking at what organizational culture is and how office dynamics can work. We'll then look at communication and how to ensure what you intend to say is what actually gets heard. We'll look at things you can do to build a productive relationship with your supervisor and ways to cultivate your own patience for times when things really aren't going as you might have hoped. Finally, we'll look at ways you can prepare for your next position. And of course, we'll have times for your questions. I'd like to welcome our speakers for this webinar. We're delighted to have with us Denise Friedman. Denise is a VISTA alum, having served as an AmeriCorps VISTA member in 1994 and 1995 at the Denver Indian Center in Denver, Colorado. Denise is now the Director of Career Development and Alumni Services for the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. In addition to this role, Denise also provides private career coaching through careerhappinesscoaching.com. Denise is also an active member of AmeriCorps Alums and serves as the official AmeriCorps Alums career coach. Later on in the session, we'll hear from current VISTA member Erin Thomas, who will talk to us about her experiences and learning about organizational culture at the site where she's serving. So without further ado, let's turn things over to Denise. Hello, Denise.
Thank you so much, Calvin. I am thrilled to be here, and I think despite all my qualifications, probably my best one is that I have had a lot of jobs. And I've started a lot of places, so I've had to start off things right, and sometimes I've started things off not right. So hopefully I'll be able to offer that expertise today. It's been wonderful seeing all the great questions coming in. I'm going to try to do my best to incorporate a lot of these in the training today, as well as hopefully we'll have time at the end. Clearly from these great questions coming in, there is a lot of interest in this topic. So we are going to start right off with stop, look, and listen. One of the things right away in starting off right is knowing the culture. And this is true on whether or not you're starting your VISTA experience with a little prior experience or whether you're coming from a substantive professional background. This is true for whether or not you're talking about your VISTA site or if you're transitioning out and going to be starting in a new job soon. So one of the first things is to understand organizational culture, and that word comes out all the time to people. What does that actually mean? It's like the collective values, beliefs, rituals, and assumptions that impact a workplace. It can be influenced by the history of the organization, the people, the current climate, and it can change all the time. It's really nuanced and complex and confusing at times. And also, when you're in the right place, it can just feel like you're like, wow, this is where I'm meant to be. This can feel like home. So, but instead of just jumping right into a job, it's important to take this time to stop, look, and listen, particularly when you're early on in your career for this first position. So let's talk about what that means to stop. First thing that's important is talking to your colleagues and getting to know them. It's often when you start off, particularly with your year of service, because you either have 1 year or maybe 2 years to get a lot done. People are like, I want to get started and do tons of work. But this is a great time to really talk and listen to colleagues and really active listening. See what's being said, but also what's not being said. There's a lot of clues to this, subtle clues about culture, about how to handle things. I also really encourage people to build what I call first interdepartmental connections and multi-level connections. So, again, sometimes, people are in very, very small sites where it's, I used to manage a VISTA project up in Maine, and sometimes people would be in an office with 2 people. Well, that's going to be a lot easier to develop. My VISTA site, where I served in Denver, had a lot of different departments. So taking the time to sit down with people, it doesn't need to be formal. You could be going to an event together. You could be just stopping by their office for a conversation, just kind of sitting and really listening. There was one job where I started in a nonprofit, and I was on the programs team. And early on, probably my first 2-3 weeks, I started talking to one of the staff who was kind of front line. And I sat down with her, and we just had lunch. It was just a casual lunch. And I learned from her that the frontline staff historically had never felt like the program staff had really heard about their needs and no one listened to them. That had a huge impact in my first couple months there because I made sure I was continually listening to them, hearing them, and making sure ideas were being, translated to people who had some impact in their line of work. I saw early on in one of the emails, the chat features that came through, someone asking about the generation gap. This can also go a long way to figuring out, understanding where people are, people who've maybe been there for a long time who are 10, 20 years older than you, to really understanding, getting through some of the assumptions. So just initially taking this time to stop in the beginning can be huge. And again, it goes beyond just your department and multi-level relationships. I'm talking about not just the department you're in, not just your organization, but getting to know the volunteers, the board, executive director, really coming from a place of authenticity. We all have seen those people that try to do this and are not authentic. I always view it as just being curious about people, asking people to do things. I remember one time I was at a place and we decided, let's do a service project together. And for a lot of people, seeing the executive director rolling up his sleeves and volunteering did a lot to kind of break down particularly some of that generational gap. Again, genuine and authentic can be huge. So first we've got the stop. Now let's think about the look. And I saw some of the comments coming in, like how do you know about some of these things about the organization, like work hours, what people are wearing? First and foremost, before you start any position, take some time, look at their Twitter feed, Facebook account, LinkedIn, read reports, get some information. If it's a large organization you're placed at, read when they've been in the news, get some historical context. So some of that you can get before you start. Then you can start to observe things, and it's subtle. You can see, what time do people come into work? What time do people come into work who are the superstars of the organization or the people who really seem like their heart really isn't into it? I knew somebody who said she was an executive director in a department, and it was very important to her that people knew work-life balance was something she valued. So when she left around 4:35 every day to go pick up her kids from school, she didn't sneak out of the office. She actually very loudly said goodbye to people. So they knew that it was valued for people to leave. Watch and see those things. At meetings, you might ask people, but you also can observe when you go into a meeting, where do people sit? There's little subtle clues on where people are sitting and, what that means around the structure of an organization, sometimes the hierarchy or sometimes the lack of hierarchy. So finding out what people are wearing, the professional attire. I always recommend to people to err on the side of more professional, particularly at the beginning, and also particularly when you're young. I used to work for somebody who was about 6'4", he had a shock of white hair, he was tall and had a commanding presence, and we used to joke around that he could walk in jeans and a T-shirt and he would command respect just from the way he was and from his age and from his stature. Other people who were younger had to dress more professionally to get that same respect. But again, I do want to qualify, it depends on where you're serving. There are some sites where maybe you're going to be out in the field all the time, and if you're showing up at a community meeting and you're overly dressed, people are going to feel like you don't understand the community and are connected to them. So really be thinking about that. Watch what people are wearing. I do understand that when you're on a VISTA stipend, it is very difficult for clothing. So, I mean, you all know this. It's of course being creative and thinking about where to get clothes. There's a lot of wonderful thrift shops. I remember I used to shop at Target. So it's finding things like that, but it's so important. Things don't need to be expensive to look polished. It's spending the $10 to get a padfolio to bring to a meeting if you're meeting with government officials or if you're meeting with funders that's going to enable you to have some type of cachet and respect into this. So, it's sad, but it's true, is people are going to remember what you're wearing. They're going to remember what you look like. They're going to remember that presence. So understanding that, again, observing and then asking questions. So we've got the stop and the look and the listen. As a VISTA, you have your on-site orientation and training. If you're at another position, you're going to have your new staff onboarding process. This is, in the first few weeks, but even beyond that, understanding and listening to your supervisor. And I saw one of the comments someone had put in there earlier, what if you have multiple supervisors? It's asking all of them. It's maybe sitting down with all of them together. People often don't ask enough questions and they assume. So if you have multiple supervisors or you have people what they considered a straight line versus a dotted line, someone you directly report to, but then some other people you kind of informally report to, make sure you're asking them all of these questions that are here as well as other ones, like what makes somebody successful? What are the priorities? You might have, signed up for either a position, a VISTA position, or started a job, and in the meantime, all of a sudden they got a new grant or they lost funding or they were in the news for something. So priorities have changed. So it's really getting to know things. When I started my VISTA service at the Denver Indian Center, I was 22 years old. It was my first job out of there and working with a very diverse community. And I sat down with a lot of people and I asked these kinds of questions and I really understood the cultural context of the community I was serving. That enabled me to avoid a lot of minefields. There were times where I worried about things later on, and because I had established good relationships by listening to people, I was able to circle back and say, I'm struggling with this. This might not be a very PC question, but I need to ask you this. And I was able to help navigate my own learning and my own impact in the community. Okay. So now we've got the stop, look, and listen. Let's dig in deeper. We've talked kind of bigger picture organizational culture. Now let's think about the understanding the dynamics. This is kind of like the people behind the processes and systems. So first is the who side of things. Now you can look at the org chart. That's going to help to some extent. But the reality is we also know there's other people in an organization, and please feel free to put in the chat when you think about your own experiences, what are some of the key people that you should know in an organization? I always think about there's the go-to person and the make things happen person. Sometimes they're the same people. Sometimes they're the people who have a formal title of Chief Operations Officer or Administrative Assistant or Office Manager. But sometimes they're just the person who's been there for a long time, who kind of has their finger on who the right people are. Sometimes it could be in the HR, but sometimes it could just be a person sitting next to you. So I remember there was an organization that I was at where there was one person who she was my go-to person for understanding how to handle situations. She always knew kind of the personnel dynamics. She knew who had not gotten along a couple years ago and why when I was at a meeting there seemed to be some tension there. So it was wonderful. I could have some informal conversation with her. Again, smaller organizations is going to vary versus larger. Some small organizations, this is going to be everybody rolled into one. Right now, like I'm at a very large bureaucracy at GW. I have one colleague who knows the both official and unofficial ways to make things happen. So I touch base with her about things. And truthfully, she makes my life much easier so I'm able to focus on the things that I need to do in my job. So feel free to plug in any other ideas so people can hear some other, ideas for all of you, and you guys have some great resources. So we got the who. Let's go next to the what. So when you're doing your VISTA, your VAD is going to be a really, really important tool, your VISTA assignment description. It's going to outline your goals and activities. You should be working with your supervisor to understand that, so it's going to help you with these office dynamics. However, whether for your VISTA service or after your service, You want to think about informal ways to know how you're getting feedback from people. Sometimes it's just having regular conversations. It might be asking your supervisor, hey, listen, in addition to our weekly meeting, every month could we just grab a cup of coffee so I can informally sit down and hear how I'm doing? It might be from someone besides your supervisor, from colleagues. You want to kind of have a constant way that you can, calibrate yourself to make sure you're kind of hitting the mark around things. Because I always say it's so much easier for a smaller shift to happen than all of a sudden you realize 2-3 months down the road, you've been doing something that someone hasn't liked how you've done it, but they didn't feel comfortable speaking up to you because of nothing you may have done, and then all of a sudden you have to shift pretty fundamentally. So think about how you're subtly getting this kind of feedback from people to make sure you're fitting into these office dynamics. A subtle thing around office dynamics is the where. You know, I saw someone said something earlier, where do I put my purse? Where do I eat for lunch? What are the hidden spots? What are the hot spots at the organization? This kind of gets back at that building relationships with people. I once was at a very large nonprofit, and I love sitting down and having lunch. I like that time. I would go into the kitchen. I was the only one there. People would go in, heat up their lunch, and leave. I quickly realized that this organization, nobody ever stopped for lunch. I realized, truthfully, for me, that wasn't a great fit for me culturally because I did like places where people slowed down, but people were so overworked at that organization, and it was a clue for me around office dynamics. What I did learn is when people actually did chat the where is in the morning they would be in the kitchen having coffee. That is a place where I would then go and grab my coffee there during that time because I wanted to build relationships, particularly in that early period where it feels awkward, you don't know people. By standing there getting your coffee, it creates a way to kind of informally build up those relationships when you're new and you don't know people. So it's just kind of getting comfortable for those things. It's also sometimes some organizations now have gotten to this model where everybody has big office spaces. So you want to figure out where are places if you're having a private meeting that you need to, kind of sneak into, or if you just need, sometimes you have to make a quick personal call. You just need to take care of some things, finding out where those little kind of those hot spots are that are vacant. So again, this could be really varied level, but just kind of make sure you have your finger on a pulse around this because it's just going to help you navigate the organization. Okay, the when. This is kind of funny, and people don't think about this when they're starting a job. People have preferences. Some people are morning people. I am one of them. It's obnoxious to other people because I'm a morning person who don't like how happy I am in the morning. I'm going to stay happy in the morning, but I might not stop by and talk with them in that mood because they need time to have their coffee, and they're going to be happier if I stop by at 10:30 and 11 for a question. One other example is in my current job, I've learned that many of my colleagues like to have casual conversations maybe at some time late in the morning and then dig into work. Well, I often, actually because I'm such a morning person, like to dig into my work earlier on. So I had to adapt things depending on what I'm looking to get used to. My supervisor and my predecessor used to sit down in conversations with her on Friday afternoons. That was a time I liked to wrap up. So I didn't necessarily always do that with her. And instead, as an organization, we realized we hadn't had regular staff meetings. So when I joined, we developed regular staff meetings on Monday mornings. It's become a win for everybody. So it's, again, getting used to people's schedules, how far in advance you need to ask for time off. These are the little things like that that can make a big difference in just kind of you feeling comfortable and that you're not stepping on people's toes. Okay, next is the how. This kind of can come down in a lot of ways to, the first part is around hierarchy. It, again, varies in size of organization, but knowing who has the power, who has the influence. If you're talking about an executive director who is super overextended and is hardly in the office, you want to know how to ask questions for that person. They might want you to stop by their office and give them information because they can't handle all the email overload. They might want really quick emails where everything's right in the subject line. So it's understanding that person and how they want to receive information and connect with you. The next thing is around, how people prefer to have for meetings. Again, might seem like a minor thing, but it's amazing what I've seen professionally is that those little things about people liking the way they like things scheduled or emailed, they can kind of be agitators in the workplace, and people can get really annoyed, particularly when they're very stressed, if somebody's not doing something the way that they are used to doing it. So just by finding those things out can be really significant to just kind of easing things over. So there are people, for example, that often always want to be at every single meeting, and then there are people who get annoyed when they get invited to every meeting. Find out which people really like that. How do people like to get scheduled for meetings? I worked with someone just recently. They don't have an online calendar. They actually still have a paper calendar. So even though I would send out meeting invites to everybody else, I would always double check with this person because it was a supervisor that this got onto their calendar. They did not do electronic calendar requests. So it's understanding those people, how they like to be scheduled. So again, it's kind of erring on the side of, a lot of this is getting to the point of erring on the side of asking early, asking often in the beginning. The more you front load, particularly from my experience, I've managed several different VISTA programs, those first 2 to 3 months, if you can take the time to get a lot of this from the beginning, the thinking, the stop, look, and listen, all of these what, where, when, and how, it's going to just ease things up as you get down the road and you start to get into the meat of your work. So let's kind of dig in a little bit deeper around this communications culture. I am sure we have all heard those horror stories of people hitting reply all instead of reply and complaining about somebody and getting caught. It is the conversations that got misconstrued via email that would have been handled so much better if someone had stopped by somebody's office. Taking the time to understand the culture of your organization makes all the difference. So the lovely little thinker. Think, write, speak carefully. Research has shown 50% of positive emails are read as neutral. 50% of neutral emails are read as negative. So if you're emailing, you want to start by thinking about how is this going to read to somebody else? You know, do you just go right in and say, this is what I need? Do you start the email with, hi, hope you had a fun weekend. If you know somebody was running in a race, hey, how'd the marathon go for you? Starting with a warmer tone. Emailing, including things like, thanks so much for your help on this project. Again, not everybody likes that. You know, you might be working with somebody who says, listen, I don't need the niceties, just send me exactly what you need. But for people who do, you want to make sure you're erring on the side of that. And, you know, as I said, err on the cautious side, err on the positive side. So I'm sure people here have, like, used some really good phrases in an email to create a positive tone. With love, I want to crowdsource this from all of you. Include some of this in the chat and the Q&A, so we're able, or the chat area, so we're able to get some insights to share with people about some tones that people have sometimes, maybe phrases that people have tended to use and how they sign things or how they message things on an email. And as they come in, we can potentially share some of them. And I'm going to actually keep going as we talk about that. Oh, these are some great ones. Appreciate your patience and understanding as I get up to speed. This looks great before offering feedback. Thank you in advance for your assistance. Signing email with all the best or best. That's true. I find when I often sign mine kind regards or kindest regards. My boss signs stuff warmly. These are all great. Offer apologies, not excuses. Totally agree with that. Sign off in partnership. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you in advance for your consideration. Wish you well. These are wonderful. I love these. Enjoy your weekend. Oh, someone said, that's great. Someone said sometimes when you put things as all caps, it does get interpreted as being all yelling. My mother loves using all caps in everything she writes. That's for her really like excitement. It can be really kind of strong when it comes across in emails and texts, so do be aware of that. Someone wrote howdy when he can. That's probably style to someone who someone is. Find a voice that's yours. Please and thank you. These are wonderful, wonderful ideas in here, so keep them coming. Okay, so when you're doing the email, review them again. Sometimes early on, or if I have a really touchy email, I'll actually ask somebody to review it for me. I'll say, can you just read this? Just make sure I have the right tone. When I'm working with my students here and they're sending out an email they're concerned about, I ask them to they're like, just send it to me. I'll give an eye on it. Writing with the reader's needs in mind. Again, that's talking about, what we said is understanding who your audience is. Some people like a lot of detail. Some people like short ones. I know some people were like, give it to me in bullet points. Again, this is asking people in advance and just saying, hey, listen, I know we're going to be working on this major service project together. What's the best way? How do you like to communicate? What do you like for the email? The same thing holds true for calls and meetings in the tone. When I talk to people about even preparing for phone interviews, I'm always really aware that you need to turn up your tone, because if you're on the phone with somebody, they're not going to be able to read your facial expression, so you want to make sure you're coming across as positive as possible. Prep for high-level calls, particularly early on. When I was very early on in my career and I had some high-level calls with people, I did a lot more prepping. It just alleviated my nerves. I would talk to people, and sometimes I would talk to people that weren't even at my organization, and just kind of putting them on, to get a feedback on there. And like someone put on there, I agree, for phone calls, if you can, you smile when you're talking. You can tell the tone. You probably could tell right now if I was smiling versus I'm not smiling. You can tell the difference, okay? Same thing for meetings. It's just going to give you that comfort. But pause as much as you can to really think about it. We've talked about this, reply versus reply all. Another thing that's important to think about is, do I want to put this in writing? Is this good to put this in email? That email could be into my record. It could be forwarded to somebody. We all know these stories about Twitter and the horror stories about things getting forward and going big. Do you want to just stop by somebody's office? Do you want to call them? What is the best way to handle this, that can be more nuanced and soften this? It's interesting. One example that I'm going to give is I worked at an organization where there was one person who was not thrilled that I had been hired in the position because they wanted someone with a very different skill set than me. Person didn't know me, but during meetings, he was very, very antagonistic to me. I did not realize that during these meetings, I often interrupted him, which did nothing to improve office dynamics and environment. Not only did it infringe upon our relationship, but the whole meeting could feel the tension. So my boss, who was incredibly supportive, said, Denise, in these moments, it's funny, he actually said, twiddle your thumbs under the table and take some deep breaths. So that enabled me to be distracted while still being fully present and listening to this person. So I did that. He was able to get his words out. I would pause, and I would respond versus react. Respond versus react. See the difference with that responding? I was able to really hear. It was incredible, the difference. It took some time in the shift in our relationship, and by the time I left this job, he was one of my biggest cheerleaders. And it really came down to me giving him the space to validate and be heard, me responding well. And again, this happened in person. Okay? Keep going. The next thing I think when you're early on in your career can often feel like a little out of your control is your supervision. You often feel like, do I have the right to speak up? Shouldn't someone else be doing this? Managing up is, I think, one of the hardest skills to learn and can be the most empowering to learn. There is an incredible video, a webinar on Vista Campus that Bethany is going to post in the chat here, and as well as at the end of the webinar, we'll show you the link to around managing up relating to your Vista supervisor relationship. It's found on demand. This can be huge, managing up, down, and sideways, but in this particular, managing up. So let's talk about this. First is, how do you set yourself up for success in this? During the first couple weeks, I always say you want to negotiate success from the start. Find out what your supervisor wants. That way you're on a mutual page about this person's priorities, your priorities, the organizational priorities, how your service here fits into them. It's a common misstep is that your supervisor might say something to you and you haven't said, like, I don't know, what does that mean by this? Asking simple questions for them. Can you provide more detail on what that would look like? The more information you get earlier on, the more you're going to know that you're not just assuming something. Again, if you're doing just 1 year of service, and this is I think actually true even when you start a job after your Vista, but particularly in the Vista because you often have an end date. There's a 3, 6, 9-month kind of cycle that goes through, and you probably learned about this a lot in your training, that people a lot in that 3-month mark are kind of like, oh my gosh, I need to know everything. That by the 6th month, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time. In the 9th month, I'm panicked. I need to do. By talking to your supervisor at the beginning, you're going to mitigate some of those concerns because you're going to have more information on what's realistic for you, because you come into, particularly in your VISTA service, and you want to be achieving everything. And it's remembering you're setting things up for success for the future. You're going to be able to achieve some of it, but not everything. So talking to your supervisor about that 3, 6, 9-month goals, going beyond what's in writing that you have with your VAD and your goal setting, and really being as specific as possible. Then when you get actually started beyond that conversation, thinking about early wins. I always like to make sure people remember early wins don't have to be big. It could be that all of a sudden you redesigned one section of the website. You changed the way that the e-newsletter was going out to your volunteers. It could be that you ran a class really well, or you did a service project differently than other people. Get these early wins in, it builds your confidence. Thinking about solutions, particularly early on. If something comes up you're confused about, rather than going into a supervisor and saying, this is a problem, saying, this came up when I was working on this program design. These are some ideas I have. Will these work? Even if you're having a conversation with them and that's not what you go with, they're going to see you as someone that is solution-oriented. And the third piece around this is a growth mindset. This is a really hot term that people have probably heard about. There's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck I'm a really big fan of. Talks about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. I'm not going to get into so much detail with this because there's a lot of information. We're going to include a link near the end. But the biggest difference is that a growth mindset is that you approach learning as ongoing. Your intelligence is evolving. If you have a step back, you're not a failure. It's just an opportunity to celebrate and learn more. This is by having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, like I'm a failure, this is what I'm limited to. Research shows much higher likelihood of succeeding, much higher likelihood of being happy in the workplace. So, there's a lot of pressure you put on yourself to learn and grow during your VISTA service. By coming in with this growth mindset, the way I view it, and it makes sense of the word growth, it's like allowing yourself to be more fluid in the workplace. More adaptable, which is just going to help you kind of shift to what needs and to your own growth, which is going to be tremendous during the year. So at this point, I'm actually going to be passing it on to our guest speaker. Who's going to be talking a little bit more about kind of the application of this, and then I'll be bringing a few more points in at the end.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Before we get to Aaron, we did have one question that I'd like to touch on before we completely move on. I think it's relevant to the discussion that we just had. Elizabeth said, can you talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of writing an email versus making a phone call versus just kind of stopping by in person?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I think, and I saw some of these comments going in the chat, and you all are spot on. Once it is in writing, it is always in writing. So there are times when you do want it in writing. If, say, you've met with somebody and, they maybe have a tendency to change what they say and go back on what they say, you can follow up a meeting you have with somebody and say, I just want to follow up with our meeting, and these were the key points of the project I need to work on in the next week. Is this what we discussed? I want to make sure that there's nothing missing. In that case, it's great to have it in writing. If you're, say, having a challenge with a situation and, say, you were at a meeting and you felt like someone undermined you in the meeting, I would be a fan of, like, let's go into that person's office. And you don't want to say, hey, let's talk about this, but kind of like, hey, listen, during that meeting I noticed there was some tension there, or this didn't feel so good to me. Can we talk about, what happened and how we can have a stronger relationship? So in those kind of situations where it's better to be talking with a person where there's a give and take, I always recommend either on the phone. If you're in the same office with somebody, do it in person. If you're not in the same office as someone, but say there's somebody who comes in the office, sometimes you might say to them, hey, listen, next time you're in the office, can we grab some coffee? If you can get it out of the office situation, sometimes it diffuses things. So always be thinking about, if this is in writing permanently, is this okay? Will this person construe this okay? What is the history of that? And then if it does need to be in writing, go it that way. And if it's something preferable, you can even follow up. If you have a conversation with somebody that was about a difficult situation or clarifying things, then you might follow it up with an email and say, thank you so much for taking the time to connect with me on this. I'm so glad we're now on the same page on how we handle X, Y, and Z together regarding this board member. So again, and the thing I would say to you with this, talk to people as much as you can to get feedback when you can on this. And know, one of the reasons that I feel like I'm so much better at this now is because, honestly, there were times I made missteps before. And if you do make misstep, and someone talked about this earlier on in the chat box around making, apologizing, not excuses, is going to saying somebody, you know what, I didn't handle that as well as I would like to. I'm learning. Can we figure out how to move forward from here? I always say, whether it's with office dynamics or anything, we all make mistakes. We all do things. It's how we handle them. It's that emotional intelligence on how we handle them, that relationships are built, that character is found, that people are successful. It's how we handle things. So hopefully that addresses more of that.
Yeah, I think it does, and I think that's really great advice. Thank you so much, Denise. So now I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Erin Thomas. Erin's been serving as the Economic Empowerment Vista at the International Rescue Committee in Baltimore, Maryland since July 2016. She's a graduate of Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Her experience in navigating professional workspaces includes her time as an intern, volunteer, and employee of several nonprofit organizations. In her VISTA project, Erin is creating financial literacy curricula and programs for newly arrived refugees. So now let's hear from you, Erin.
Hi, guys. So thank you for that wonderful welcome. So I'm going to share a few stories from my first 6 months as a VISTA that kind of relate to what Denise has already talked about. So per my introduction, I'm a VISTA serving at the International Rescue Committee, working on strengthening and creating new financial literacy programs across our office. So just to provide a little more context about what I'll be sharing today, my main projects thus far have been developing a system to help our clients open their first bank account, building curriculum about banking, credit building, and taxes, and working with outside agencies to help deliver these services. And as well as convening a task force of staff leaders to ensure that we're all presenting consistent information regarding financial literacy to our clients. So my first story. So this was right around when I started, probably a few weeks in. A peer of mine from another department and I were just having a casual conversation over lunch. She teaches a course on job readiness for new refugees who will begin working soon. So during this casual lunch, we were talking about adding some activities about banking and budgeting to her class. So after that, we kind of started working on the project together. So we didn't really consult our supervisors or anyone else, but we just started working on this curriculum and working on activities to share in her class. So soon she gave an update to her supervisor about this project, and I did not. So without realizing that there were some pre-existing tensions between supervisors of these two departments, my supervisor got an angry email about something that I had done that I hadn't told her about, and it caused a bit of contention between the two of them. So I was able to smooth it over in a conversation with my supervisor, explaining that, we had good intentions. She explained to me that the chain of command is important in this office, which is something that I wasn't perceptive to in the beginning. So to kind of smooth things over more, we scheduled a meeting with the 4 of us who were involved in that situation and the deputy director of our office. So we were able to discuss where things fit and how we can avoid miscommunications moving forward. So now I run everything past my supervisor before I make them more formal. So even little things that come up in, those casual conversations during lunch, just so we can be on the same page about my project. So I think what I would have done differently at the beginning of my project is kind of scope out how things get done and how, the chain of command works here. Because I've been in other settings where it's not so important, but here it's very important that, things are cleared through that sort of hierarchy. Okay, so the next one, this one might be more of a unique challenge to me, but I think there's a good lesson here. So I share an office with my supervisor, so we chat casually all the time, which was great. We got to know each other really well pretty quickly, but this kind of became a challenge when I had bigger updates that I wanted to share with her and that needed more time to discuss, but we actually never set up a formal meeting time. So I know that sounds kind of ironic since we sit right next to each other and we're basically on top of each other all the time, but we had never set up like a check-in or a meeting time that we were going to talk about my project and my updates, and she would give me feedback. So I had casually mentioned to my supervisor that I met some tax lawyers who wanted to volunteer with us and offer their services to our clients at an event. And she said, wow, that sounds great. But that was kind of the extent of that conversation. So I had kept working on it, and I just couldn't find time to give her formal updates because we didn't have that time set aside. So a few weeks before that tax clinic, and we were talking, and I was like, oh, yeah, they're coming. It's going to be great. And she was like, oh, what are you talking about? I didn't realize this had like become a formal project. So we realized that we hadn't been meeting in a formal way. And that was kind of where we were missing each other on like big important updates. So after that, we decided to schedule a biweekly check-in for an hour that we commit to because we're both very busy. So having that time set aside that we both commit to showing up and being prepared and bringing what we need to talk about to that meeting, it has made everything move a lot more smoothly, and we're both informed about what we're working on and how things are going. So I know it's kind of an ironic situation, but I think that carving out that time to meet has been really helpful in being on the same page. And now we love our shared office, as this lovely slide says. Okay, and this last one, so a big part of my project is to ensure consistency in the financial literacy messaging and programming across all of the departments within my office. So the idea is to kind of create a standard operating procedure for direct service staff members in how we're going to deliver financial literacy topics and trainings to our clients. So this requires input from all departments and important staff leaders. So my plan to kind of attack this part of my project was to schedule just a big meeting for an hour with everyone who I felt like was important and needed to be involved in the project. And then moving forward, we'd have just a bunch of meetings to complete this task and accomplish everything together. So at the first meeting, probably about half of the people that I needed input from attended, and the entire hour was dominated by one person talking. So I felt horrible, like I had kind of wasted everyone's time, and these were very important people in my office who were very busy, and I just felt really bad about it because the meeting it felt unorganized, and I felt like I looked incompetent. So I knew that things needed to be reevaluated to get this work done. So I decided to schedule one-on-one check-ins with each of these staff leaders who needed to be involved and needed to be involved in this planning process. So during this time that I was meeting with all of these important staff leaders, I was able to get all the information that I needed from each of them, their suggestions, their feedback, and it was also a great time to just generally get to know all of these people on a more personal basis and kind of share what I've been working on and my thoughts. So, from there I was kind of invited to shadow their programs, to learn more, and it turned out to be a great time for me to build relationships while getting the information that I needed from them. So doing this made getting buy-in and cooperation a lot easier for this project and other projects that came after. And a lot of the work that I'm doing now is really informed by the information that they shared with me during those sort of a little bit more informal one-on-one meetings. So I learned that relationship building can really help you get work done. And you'll find those go-to people that Denise had talked about earlier who can really be champions and advocates for you and also offer valuable feedback.
Cool. Thank you, Erin, for sharing your experiences, of navigating the workplace at your Vista site. It really sounds like you encountered some things that I think we can all relate to. I know working in the office here, I can definitely relate to, as well as some unique challenges, that are maybe specific to your project, that really illustrate the concepts that Denise shared earlier. So now we're going to bounce back to Denise to hear more about the role of patience in the workplace. Denise?
Thanks, Calvin, and thanks, Erin. That was wonderful hearing some real-life examples, putting all this stuff into practice. So several years ago, I was trying to cultivate patience. I'm like, I'm going to buy the patience flowers and grow them. Well, you can guess where this is going. Yes, they died. I even tried it a second time, and they died again. And the reason I tell this story is that, you know, I've probably at this point done career coaching for thousands of people, and I've yet to have anybody say, I'm great at being patient. People are always like, I'm really bad at being patient. I'm really bad at uncertainty. A lot of us have that problem. So how do we work to cultivate patience? Clearly, I should never be growing the plant again. I don't want to do that, but there are some things that you can do. So first, let's talk about accepting. There are going to be things in your job that you don't love. And this is true of any job, particularly true of your service year where you have, you know, often, not just your service year, but often earlier in your career, you end up in positions that maybe you don't have as much control over. So there's going to be things that you don't love to do, so it's making peace with it. There are things in my job, and I'm in my mid-40s, and I've been working for 25 years that I don't necessarily love in my job, so I figure out. I mean, it sounds silly, but sometimes I give myself a reward when I do things that I don't love to do. Maybe I'll go for a walk afterwards. Maybe I'll have a piece of chocolate. Maybe I'll talk to a colleague. Sometimes it's figuring out how to do it faster, how to create a system to make it work better. And sometimes it's like, okay, if I don't love to do this, when's a good time of day for me to get it done? Second piece around accepting is what you don't know. So sometimes that means that you're going to have to ask people. One of the things that I found for me as I got further and further in my career, one of the things I loved the most is I was much more comfortable saying to somebody, I don't know that person. I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? Research actually shows when people love to help other people, and they actually feel more indebted to you when they help you, which kind of goes in reverse thinking of what you might imagine. But people love helping other people. So ask them. You know, you might ask a former Vista who was there. You might ask people who were there then. You know, really talk to people during your onboarding process to get some insights into managing things. Then the second is allowing time for results in your own adjustment. We've talked about this earlier today, but really giving yourself that chance to do that. Change can be slow. Change can be very slow at organizations, whether small or large organizations. Even if you're at a small organization and you're working in the community, you're putting things into place. So it's figuring out how to set wins for yourself that even if it's not the huge shift that you're looking to have happen, where you get small wins for the results, your own adjustment to something into a community. Some people do a VISTA service that's already in a community they're at, but a lot of times many of us relocate to different areas. So you're adjusting to life in a new community, friends, being different from family, just a culture, let alone adjustment into the workplace. You need to be kind to yourself, you know, figuring out low-budget ways to kind of treat yourself. I remember when I did my VISTA service, there was a movie theater near me that had 99-cent movies on Tuesdays. Now, again, remember, this is 25 years ago. I don't know if you'll find that now. But finding ways, and I used to reward myself with that, you know, to just feel better about the adjustment with things. Assessing your goals and assessing fit, again, is really important. So, you know, sometimes goals can feel unachievable, unrealistic. It's very common, you know, when I used to run this program in Maine, I used to have 35 VISTAs, and it would be very common in the first couple months for a VISTA to come to me and say, this organization isn't the right fit. I want to move to a different site. So in all of the time of doing this, and I've run about 3 different VISTA programs, I think I've had 1 or maybe 2 people actually switch sites. And they were often because in those situations it was because something had drastically changed at the site. generally it was part of someone's professional development, and we worked closely with them. I was managing a project, and I worked closely with their supervisor to talk about how to navigate their role in the supervision, what was going on, reading a lot of things. We would work together with them. They would sometimes talk to some other VISTAs. How can you kind of change how you're showing up to change the results? So it's thinking about giving yourself, accepting what is, allowing the space, and then assessing and kind of keep adjusting. Going back to what I talked about earlier, as much as you can do this in a subtle ways, touching base with people earlier, it's just going to help you navigate things a little bit easier instead of all of a sudden being 4, 5, 6 months down the road and realizing that you've been unhappy for a long time. So as much as you can, having that patience. So this is, we're kind of going on more macro level things at this point. The next macro level topic I want to talk about is dressing for the job you want. Now, people will often talk about this in a literal way about dressing for the job you want, which we touch base on around how the professional dress. But what I would say for you is really dressing for the job you want, about thinking about where you want to go forward in your life. So first and foremost, we know always the priority is excelling at your your goals. You need to do an excellent job at that. And then you can think about more. You know, with VISTA, we often talk about it's working yourself out of the job where things become sustainable. You know, can you create, you know, a guide for what you're doing? You know, that might not have been in your VAD, but you were creating this new program. Can you make sure that there's a system in place? Can you create a database? Going beyond, you ran a successful program with your volunteers. Instead of just sending emails, can you create and use a different software system that sends really beautiful thank you notes? Things that go beyond really help you demonstrate your commitment and abilities, which can sometimes go a long way towards down the road if maybe a little bit later in your VISTA service or in your job there becomes a promotion or there becomes an opportunity to turn your VISTA into a position. So put in time, but keep life in balance. I remember that early on, and someone put this in the chat box, like how to manage the life balance. It's not easy, and even though I say life balance, the word balance is kind of this myth that's work-life balance, is make sure you're putting in the hours you need to put in, but think about quality instead of quantity. It's very easy to burn out early on in your career, particularly in your VISTA service when you have this time and you feel like you need to do things. Figure out micro things that you can do. Again, I've mentioned this earlier, but figure out what works for you, whether it's listening to a video, whether it's going for a walk. I know this sounds funny. I actually was just talking to a colleague today. I get an email every day called the Dodo. And what it is, it's an email that has really, really short videos around birds and animals that have been rescued. And there was literally one today I showed somebody here that was a cat giving a massage to a Great Dane. Now, this might sound silly, but for 30 seconds it allows me to pause, allows me to laugh, and then get back into the serious work I'm doing. Now, that works for me. Everybody has different things. Now, that's, again, finding what works for you to put things in balance, to know that there's always going to be more work and that you need to create that balance of when you need to leave, when you need to turn off your work email. This goes back to what we talked about, talking to your supervisor, talking to colleagues. What is the expectation about how to balance things? You know, if, you know, you're in a situation where it's a time limited, where you're having to put in extra time right there, you know, initially asking somebody, is there a way, if your organization has comp time, to leave a couple hours earlier, come in a couple hours later. So really being very mindful about it and asking in a way that says, hey, listen, I had to work all weekend for that service project. Is it possible for me to take off a day next week? So being that way with everybody in your organization. Being open to learning, you're going to do this in your job, but then learning some more. Say in your mind you think, okay, I eventually want to be an executive director or chief operating officer, or I want to work with public-private partnerships. Are there some ways that you can, that don't, you know, infringe upon your work that you need to do? Is, can you go to a board meeting to just watch and observe? How do people manage board meetings? You know, can you actually help volunteer in a community event that maybe goes beyond what you're doing, so you can learn how people do community organizing? Are you, you know, just making sure you're learning. If all of a sudden you're in your field and say you're working in a place on public health and you realize you're really interested in education, start getting e-newsletters from those organizations, staying current in the field, learning about what you're doing. It's an easy way to kind of keep that forward thinking. Maintaining professionalism. We all know this. You never know who's watching, whether in the lunchroom, the bathroom, hanging out at happy hour. You don't know who's watching and who's repeating. So think about the image that you're presenting. This is particularly true, I mean, this is true everywhere, but, you know, when I used to run the VISTA project in Maine, a lot of my VISTAs were in small communities where, you know, their role as a VISTA was so apparent no matter what they were doing and where they were at. So thinking about where you're at and will people know and keeping that professionalism. Find role models. I talk to people all the time, you want to create a board of advisors. I'm not a big fan of the word mentor because it's just one person, but finding people who you really like how they're doing things, watch how they behave, and then you start to roll with that modeling, start practicing that. When I was at the Heller School at Brandeis, our dean used to be the chief economist in the Department of Labor under Clinton. She used to handle and you have to go toe-to-toe with the toughest people. So I was really always aware of how she handled difficult situations. I would be aware of thinking the language choice that she would use, and I would replicate this. I had one of mine, I always ran my VISTA project. My boss there used to never use the word but. It was always and. So I started to model myself after this. So find people whose style is authentic to your style and begin to practice modeling in that way. So again, there's people that are going to be ahead of you that you're like, wow, I see how you're doing this. Let me learn from you. So finally, just kind of some resources before we open it up into Q&A. We talked about the Navigating the VISTA Supervisor Relationship. Looks like there's another webinar on demand that is Writing with Purpose, Precision and Pizzazz. I talked about that book, Mindset, by Carol Dweck. I'm a big fan of Lindsay Pollack, and I know not everybody on this webinar is going to be a millennial because sometimes people do VISTA service further in life. There's a lot of stuff out there in the workplace, in the career world. I think she is one of the best. I would recommend following her, reading her information. Not only is her stuff very substantive, but it's really easy to kind of digest. She knows how to present the information out there well. So she's one, and I'm sure there's some other resources, and people feel free to put some other resources that they use, that they've read or watched or followed in the chat feature before we open this up to some questions. And the last slide is for me with this, with Steve Jobs, is that you're going to work a lot. You want to find to do great work is to love what you do, and part of loving what you do is coming and approaching with this from the place where you feel good about who you are. And all of this stuff we talked about today, all these tools and these resources, is about you showing up at your best in the position that you have, whether it's your VISTA service, whether it's afterwards, whether it's like me 25 years out. I truly love what I do, and part of it is because I found a way to be authentically myself in the place and understand the organizations where I'm at. So with that, I am going to turn it back over, and we're going to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Denise and Aaron. You've both given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure our audience may have some questions for you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. That was a lot of really, really great information. Before we get to the questions, we do want to hear from you, our participants, to know what you thought about this presentation. On the right side of your screen, you'll find a quick poll where you can share feedback about this webinar. So if you would take a moment just to answer those 10 questions, you have to use the scroll bar to see them all, but your input helps us improve our webinars and plan topics that are of interest to you. We look at every single comment that you put. We make sure that we, are really trying to provide what you want. So these polls really help us out a lot in these evaluations. We really take them seriously. So please give us a second and give us some feedback about what you'd like to see in the future, and maybe what you don't want to see, and just how this went for you. That being said, so we've given you a lot to think about. The poll will remain up, so you can do it as long as you need to, or you can take as much time as you need. But it's time for your questions. So you can ask questions using the Q&A panel located on the bottom right of your screen. If you can't see it, you can click at the top where it says Q&A, and then you can type it in there. But we'll also ask our operator, Ted, to let us know how to ask questions by phone.
The phone lines are now open for questions. If you'd like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1 and record your name. If you'd like to withdraw your question, press *2. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ted. Let's see, do we have anything in the queue yet? Not quite yet. But again, if you guys want to ask some questions, you can put them in the Q&A. I did see a lot of talk in the chat while we're waiting. A lot of talk in the chat about, sort of being asked to do things at your project that were not in your VAD. Just know that, that your VAD should be your guiding principle in your project and should really be what you're using to outline the projects and tasks that you're asked to do. That's not to say that you can't stray a little bit and help out where needed, but that should be the main bulk of your work. If you're having any issues with that or feel like you're being asked to do a lot of direct service or just kind of replacing staff, I would reach out to your state office. They're very easy to get in touch with. You can email them. It's your state abbreviation at cns.gov. For example, if you're in Texas, that would be tx@cns.gov. So that's an easy resource for you. So let's see. Oh, we do have one question from Clara. Clara says, how can I communicate with others that lack communication skills? That's a good question.
That's a great question. You know, I mean, there's not an easy answer to that. You know, some of it is really trying. You can't change other people. I mean, you know this, you know, we all know this, is really trying to think about what's going to work for that person. And knowing that, again, it's knowing that there might be some limitations with some situations. Reality is sometimes these situations when you're in a, particularly if it's a position where it's a year-long position, it helps inform you of what you're looking for in the future. And you can also sit down and talk to people. I would suggest if you have, say, a couple people on your team or your organization that you have a difficult time communicating with, talk to others who've been working there for longer and say, hey, listen, you know, I'm having a, I feel like I'm not able to work as well as I would like to with Jane Smith. Would love to know what tools that you've used, what has been effective for you in terms of communicating with that person. It's really that, you know, I'm a big fan of asking questions to people, even of that person, like, listen, what works for you? What do you need? And sometimes it means kind of taking a step back to your own pride, to what you might want to do to figure out how to be effective. You know, I've worked with people that say, you know, their ego really needs to be stroked a lot in order to be effective in a job. I've worked with some managers that have been in that situation. And I've learned that even though that doesn't feel great to me and that's not my preferred style and I don't do it to the extent where it feels so uncomfortable to me, sometimes making sure that, say, they get public acclaim about something that they've done that I publicly do for them enables me to do my job better and for them to communicate more effectively with me. So it's a very complicated question. I have to be honest. I would say look at the Managing Up one. There's a lot of books on communications. We could talk for hours on this topic alone.
Yeah, I agree. And I think my suggestion, you know, also is just to, sort of like you said, just be very direct and say, hey, you know, how do you best receive information? What's the best way to get in touch with you? You know, do you want me to email you? Do you prefer phone calls? Do you like face-to-face interactions? I find that works really well. It's not, and if you're like nervous about asking that, just know that it's not an offensive question to ask someone, you know, what's the best way to get in touch with you, and and you know, how do you like to receive information? Some people really enjoy an email where they can kind of get it and sit on it for a while and maybe think about it, process it before responding. Some people do like just a quick phone call. Hey, here's my questions. Can we answer those? Let's get this done in 30 seconds. It really depends, and it's up to you, I think, to ask, you know, what's the best way to communicate with you. All right, let's see. We got some other questions here. Let's see. Someone says, how do I get access to this PowerPoint for future reference? This will be posted in about a week. The recording will on the Vista campus, and all of the resources that we mentioned will also be posted there. Let's see. Someone says, can we leave our Vista position early if we're doing more office work than VAD work? Kathy, you're always able to leave your Vista position. Obviously, we want you to stay, you know, but I would suggest trying to work it out first. You know, if you find that you're doing more office work than VAD work, talk to your supervisor and say, hey, you know, I'm here to, you know, to do this. This is outlined. This is what we discussed, you know, when I first started, and I'd really like to get back to this direction. Again, if you need some help facilitating that conversation, your state office is a great resource, you know, for that, because they review the VADs, they know what you're supposed to be doing on your project, and if you find that you are, you know, not doing things that are directly related to your VAD, I would get in touch with them and say, hey, you know, I'm finding that I, you know, am doing this and this and this, when I should be doing this and this, because you maybe help me kind of get back on track over here, and they'd be more than happy to help you out with that. But also, we want you to stay in your VIS position. Don't leave if you're doing more office work than VAD work. Try to work it out first. Let's see. What else do we have? This is a good question from Haley, and I think it's a little tricky. It says, how can I communicate with a disorganized leadership that our goals are not being met when they think that goals are being met?
When you say disorganized leadership, I mean, I would, one of the best things that you can do in an organization where it's a large organization like that is find allies. And again, I don't know from this question if you're a Vista versus if you're new and you're talking about this, or if you're someone who's thinking about the next position. But the reality is sometimes one of the challenges of being Vista, very honestly, is that they know that you're not there for many, many years. So sometimes your voice being heard with leadership in situations like this might not be heard the way a permanent employee would be. So you would want to, in some of these situations, look at how do you find allies within the organization. If it's, say, your supervisor who also agrees with you, you might be working with your supervisor on how you can kind of implement some things. You might look at how you can look at some small wins and sit down with people to kind of, if they feel like that the goals are being met and you're not, is how to identify them. Really finding out why do they think something's successful. Are they looking at it from a different perspective that you are? But one of the best things I find is if you're at an organization where you can find some allies to work with, to identify, answer those questions, people particularly that are going to be there after your term of service. You might find people who have, remember we talked about those influencers at the organization that might have an ability to really impact that in a way that can make your Vista service feel more successful.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent answer. Let's see. I'm going to go to Ted on the phone to see if we have anyone on the phone.
I'm not showing any questions yet, but again, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1 and record your name.
All right, wonderful. All right, so we have a question here from Barbara who says, how do you work with a supervisor who's a one-person show? And Barbara, I guess by that you mean maybe someone who is who's juggling lots of things maybe at once, or who has a lot of other responsibilities.
So, it goes back to I would ask the person, and again, sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, I never want to ask this person for help, but really saying to the person and really playing to the fact that they have all of this one-person show, like, it looks like you have a lot to get done. How can my service, how can I support this best for you? And it's finding out. That person might say, I don't want to have regular meetings. I cannot have regular meetings. I need to maybe only meet once a month instead of this, or things via email. It's, again, going back to them to ask them what you can do. What can you, really being as specific as what projects of mine can I run with independently? If so, how often do I need to check back? What things do I need to check back onto? What things do you need me to be checking in with you on? So you're knowing in advance places where, the person wants the touch points and asking them, how frequently do you want this? When do you want this? How do you want this? It might be that person says, just put something on my desk and I'll deal with it on my desk when I come in at my own time, and somebody's like, just send me an email. So really finding that out. Again, this is very, very common at nonprofits. And to be honest, it's very common in really any sectors. Very rarely do you have any organization where people have enough resources, enough staff, and particularly if you feel like your supervisor is balancing all of that. It's again going and figuring out what do they need from you to what level, and what can you run with independently. There might be more that you can do independently that they'd be happy to have you just run with.
I agree. Yeah, I think it could be a good opportunity for you. Instead of seeing it as a challenge, maybe see it as an opportunity to kind of gain some autonomy, and to really take on a project on your own and really own it. Definitely get your supervisor's buy-in. Say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what I'd like to do. Is this cool with you? And if they give you the sign-off, and you execute it and execute it well, you have something really big to show off. You have something that you can be proud of and say, hey, I did this on my own. I was able to use all the connections, use everything that I have, all my resources available to make this one thing happen and work on this project, and you have something really to be proud of. So yeah, but maybe try seeing it, frame it differently to yourself. Say, okay, you know what? Yeah, this is a challenge. Maybe I'm not getting as much connection as I need, but but I do have the opportunity now to work on something and really flex my skills. So yeah, so let's see. What other questions do we have? We've got we got a lot of questions in here now. Let's see. How do you manage 2 or more spontaneous projects with 2 different supervisors? I'm about to start a new part of my VAD, and I'm nervous about not giving enough of my attention to all of my tasks. Oh.
I think a lot of these questions go back to asking about the time, and then being honest if you're working on a project that is taking up too much of your time, and saying to them, so I have these 2 projects, which elements are a priority for which? I'm a big fan, I know it sounds really geeky, but I'm a really big fan of spreadsheets and project flow. You know, it's one of those things that I think is very much instilled with me from being a Vista. You know, I had many, many projects all at once. I was working on 2 different projects, and about a month into my Vista service, the person running the computer literacy program quit, and I basically ended up having to take over that entire program, and I was also doing 2 other, the mentoring program and the holiday project. And I, you know, really outlined things as much as possible, created deadlines, and checked in with people about these deadlines. One of the things that I find is we often overestimate how much time something's going to take for us, and we panic about it. So checking in with people and saying, you know, can you do this? Finding other people who might be able to help create these systems for you and offload the projects and pieces for you. And then I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. When I first started my Vista service, when I first started at the Brandeis Heller School, I was creating a career center. My boss and I used to say I was building the track, driving the train, building the stations, and loading passengers simultaneously, and it was nuts. And, you know, those big quotes that they have that are courage, and they'll have an eagle and all these inspirational quotes. Well, there's one site that we had a quote that was a leaning tower of Pisa, and it says, mediocrity, it's a lot easier and nobody notices until it's too late. Now, I'm not a proponent of mediocrity, and that's not what I'm saying, but I used to have this in a place that I could look at in my office. There are times where I had to do something that made it good enough, and I had to know when to say something was good enough. So it was, the fact that it was somewhere visual, where I always actually was where I kept my purse in my office, so I would open it up and it would make me laugh. So, for example, I had to create career guides. I was a one-person office for 400 students, so I created career guides. The first version of the career guides that I created, they were not nearly the quality that I wanted, but it got me to a place where it was stable, so they could have that resource. Then when it was the summertime, I could then improve on the project and make it better. So there might be some times where you are putting in 100% into something, where if you put it in 80%, that difference isn't going to be significant in the project. So it's learning when to do that. I found was really helpful for my sanity, and I still continue to do that. Again, I am a striver. I want things to be top-notch. At the same time, I also need to recognize sometimes when that leaning tower of Pisa needs to be in my head and think, okay, this has got to be what it's got to be for now, because there's only so many hours in the day.
No, totally. That is a little controversial, but I feel you, and I get it, and I think, and I think that you're very correct in that one. So we have time for about one more question. But in looking through these, I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but in looking through them, I honestly think a lot of it comes down, like you said, just direct communication and outlining things, you know, and kind of not being afraid to advocate for yourself and say, look, this is what I've got, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I can handle. Help me work through this, you know, let's work through this together, because I'm committed to doing a good job, you know, and I want to show up and I want to do this, but this is what I can handle, and this is, or this is what's going on. You know, I have a lot of those conversations, and trust me, once you get through the first one, they only get easier after that. So let's see, we've got, so this is an excellent question, I think, to end on, to sort of tie up our entire presentation. Emily says, any advice on adjusting to a very new culture? I moved from the overworked Midwest work ethic to Hawaii, where life is much more slow.
Can I move there, Emily? Can I?
Right. Consider yourself lucky, honestly.
No, and I'm sure you get laughed with that. You know, again, it's giving yourself some time. It's really giving yourself time to adjust, and talking to people, knowing it is going to feel uncomfortable. You know, the analogy that I'm going to make, which I use this a lot when I talk about making transitions professionally into different careers. We all have those pairs of jeans in our wardrobe that were really, really comfortable, but they kind of hang a little bit on us. They're kind of loose. We don't look as great in them. Going jean shopping, making a transition, going jean shopping, whether it's for a new career or going to new Vista service, is not necessarily always a fun process. When we find new jeans and we put them on, they feel stiff and uncomfortable at first. but we do look really good in them, but they don't feel as natural as the old baggy hanging jeans. So sometimes you have to remember you're wearing these quote-unquote new jeans that look great on you, that this Vista service, this new position is going to look great on you and is going to be amazing, but it doesn't feel as comfortable initially. So just giving yourself that time. I'm a big, big fan of self-care. I study positive psychology, and there's so much research around what we need to do to prime ourselves to feel good that enable us to show up well in the workplace. If this means finding a coffee shop where you feel comfortable on your way to work, where you sit outside and get a cup of coffee every now and then. And, you know, with Vista, you might not have this to do all the time, whether it's a different walk, whether it's creating, you know, if you miss where you're home from, putting a picture up where your office is something from home. Things relying on networks, talking to people from home, whatever you can do to get adjusted to these new genes, knowing this is, my Vista service was incredibly difficult in a lot of ways. It was a challenging, intense work experience, and it was the most extraordinary year of my life in terms of personally how I grew. I lived in Denver. I had moved there from being in Delaware. And professionally, the skill sets that I gained, it wasn't always easy, but it was extraordinary. And it's keeping that perspective, that longer-term perspective that you can, and that reminder, and maybe talking to some other Vistas, former Vistas, talking to some AmeriCorps alum about the retrospective looking back and how those new pair of jeans eventually got comfortable on them is what I would recommend.
And with that, we are going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Denise. I want to say thank you also to Aaron, and thanks to our technical team support, Joanne and Bethany. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar, and we hope that it was useful and that you got something out of this. And we hope that you can join us for one or both of our next webinars in February. So we have a session on strategies for focusing your career search. That's on February 9th. I'll be hosting and presenting that one. And we have a second session on creating high-impact images for better outreach on February 28th. And that'll be presented by one of my coworkers. So check it out under the webinars page, under the Connect and Learn tab on the Vista campus to sign up for those future webinars or to view recordings of past webinars. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you all so much.